You know, the name itself, the Boston Massacre, it's kind of brilliant propaganda, isn't it? It immediately makes you picture this brutal, one-sided slaughter. But was it really that simple? Or was it something way more complicated? A chaotic street fight that was expertly spun into a legend. So let's dig in and uncover the real story behind that very powerful name. So that brings us to the big question we're tackling here. What really went down on that snowy Boston street? Together, we're going to try and peel back all those layers of propaganda and legend to get to the truth at the heart of this, well, this truly pivotal moment in American history. Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get a feel for the tension simmering in the city. Then, we are going to walk through the fateful night itself, moment by moment. We'll see how this incident got framed as a massacre. We'll look at the powerful image that defined it, uncover a pretty surprising trial verdict, and then finally, connect all the dots to the road to revolution. All right, so to really get what happened, you've got to understand the setting. Boston in 1770 it was a total powder keg just waiting to explode. The events of March 5th didn't just happen out of nowhere. They were the spark that lit the fuse. What you had were these two groups, right? And they were on a total collision course, forced to live right on top of each other. The British soldiers were there to enforce laws and collect taxes that, from their perspective, were totally legitimate. But for the colonists, no way. They saw these guys as an occupying army, and they were furious about being taxed without having any say in their own government. And look, this wasn't just some high-level political debate. Hated laws like the Stamp Act and the Townshend Acts made it incredibly personal. Things like arguments, shouting matches, even fistfights between citizens and the redcoats became an everyday thing. You could literally feel the tension in the air. And then came the night of March 5th, 1770. All that tension we've been talking about, it finally boiled over. I mean, just look at how fast this all went down. In just a handful of minutes, what started as yelling and taunts turned into an all-out physical confrontation. We're talking colonists throwing snowballs, chunks of ice. The whole thing just spiraled out of control. And then, a gunshot. So, in all that chaos, all that noise and panic, who fired first? Was it a nervous soldier? Was it an accident? The witness accounts were all over the place. And that's the thing. The really crucial point, nobody knows for sure. We just don't. And that one fact makes the simple story of good guys versus bad guys a whole lot more complicated. Okay, so from that absolute chaos, we have to turn to the tragic aftermath. This is the moment a street fight starts to become a historic massacre. 5. That's the number. When all the smoke cleared, 5 colonists were dead or dying. And that number, well, it changed everything. This wasn't just another brawl. It was now a lethal event. And one of those men was Crispus Attucks, a dock worker of African and Native American descent. He's a man we now remember as the very first martyr of the American Revolution. His name is a powerful reminder that these weren't just numbers, they were people, and their deaths were about to galvanize an entire movement. Because what happens next? It's not really about the facts anymore. It's about the story. And to understand that, you have to understand this key concept, propaganda. Basically, it's information that's designed to push an agenda, right? To make you feel a certain way and get you on a particular side. And it is absolutely central to how this story unfolds. And that brings us to, honestly, one of the most effective pieces of propaganda in American history. Because the story that was told about the Boston Massacre, mostly through one single iconic image, became way more powerful than the chaotic reality of the event itself. Okay, so let's just recap the reality for a second based on what people who were actually there said. It was messy. You had an angry, aggressive crowd throwing things. You had a small group of surrounded soldiers who were probably terrified and confused. It was a chaotic, two-sided confrontation. Got that picture in your head? Good. Hold on to it. Okay, because that is not what most colonists saw. Nope, what they saw was this. Paul Revere's famous engraving. And just notice the differences. Where are the snowballs and chunks of ice? Gone. The chaotic mob, now it's a peaceful, seemingly innocent crowd. And the panicked, disorganized soldiers, they're now an organized firing squad, calmly executing civilians. This isn't a riot. This is cold-blooded murder. You really can't underestimate the power of a single image.
Think of this as the viral meme of its day. It spread like wildfire through newspapers and pamphlets all over the colonies. It cemented this idea of British tyranny in people's minds, and it turned a messy incident in Boston into a full-blown crisis for the colonies.
But wait, the story takes another really surprising turn here. The soldiers weren't just shipped back to England. They were arrested, and they were put on trial for murder, right there in Boston, in a city that was basically screaming for their blood. And you'll never guess who stepped up to defend them. In a move that just shocked everybody, it was John Adams, a leading patriot, a future president. Why would he do it? Because Adams had this fierce belief that the law had to apply to everyone, even the most hated men in town. It was a deeply principled stand and a huge, huge risk for him to take. And get this, the verdict was absolutely stunning. Despite the outrage in the city, despite that powerful propaganda from Paul Revere, the jury actually listened to the evidence, and most of the soldiers were found not guilty. I mean, what a moment. It was a total triumph for the rule of law over mob justice, and it proved that even on the brink of revolution, the colonists' belief in a fair trial ran deep. All right, so let's zoom out and tie this all together. Why does this one complicated night matter so much in the grand scheme of things? The Boston Massacre, it wasn't the shot that started the war. Not exactly. But it was a huge crack in the foundation of British rule. It created this wound that never really healed. And the memory of it, the story that was fueled by that famous engraving, it just kept that anti-British anger burning hot, pushing the colonies further and further down that road to war. And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. The Boston Massacre is just this perfect, powerful example of how the narrative, the story, can shape history. And it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How often is the story we tell about an event, the name we give it, the picture we share, more important, more powerful than what actually happened on the ground?